Senator Rubio, thank you so much for coming in. Appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
You have a late night?
Not really.
Is Bob still here? What would you like to ask Senator Rubio?
Oh, come on.
Are you still doing this shit?
No, ask him a real question. This is a great chance.
I decline.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Senator, last night you talked about a new direction for the Republican Party. And one of the things that you talked about is education and how to make higher education cheaper, how to reform Pell Grants. What would be the number one thing that you would do, that you can do as a freshman minority senator?
Well, I don't think there is a number one thing. There's a number of number one things. You got to do them all. I mean, look, the biggest obstacle we face is that the 21st century student doesn't look like the 20th century student. It's not just an 18-year-old that graduated high school. Obviously, that still continues to be a significant part of the folks that are going into college, but it's also the 38-year-old who's decided to go back to school and get a degree. That was my sister's experience. It's also the 25-year-old that's been, after 10 years of being out of high school, has been kind of stuck in these service area jobs and is deciding they want to empower themselves with new skills. And the great news is that technological advances are going to not only lower the time and cost of getting that kind of skill acquisition, but are going to make it much more accessible. And what we have to make sure is that our student aid programs don't stand in the way of it. So let me just give you an example. Right now, what we have a student aid program, like the Pell Grants or the loan programs, they accredit institutions. They don't accredit courses. And so that obviously is weighed towards your traditional four-year land-grant universities. Nothing wrong with that. I went to the University of Florida, a school that is about to crush Louisville in the Sugar Bowl. But anyway, and I know that's not going to have any points with Mitch McConnell, but what about the folks that don't want to do that, that can't do that? And so they want to take a course, an online course from this school here and an online credit from this school over here. We should accredit courses so that we're not discriminating against allowing people to acquire skills in that setting. So that, I think we have to reform our Pell Grant and loan programs so that they reflect the 21st century student. I think that's a bipartisan thing. And the second thing I would do is make sure that students have more information. And that's why I sponsored the Right to Know Before You Go Act, which means that before you take out this loan, students are going to be given information about this is how long it's going to take to graduate, this is how much you can expect to make if you graduate with this degree, and this is how much you're going to have to owe in student loans. Now, you still want to get that philosophy major, that's fine, but it doesn't pay a lot of money and you're going to owe 150 grand, you know, that kind of thing.
We have not heard Republicans talking a lot about these topics, and the Louisiana governor, Bobby Jindal, said Republicans need to stop being the stupid party. In what sense have Republicans been the stupid party?
Well, I don't know about that. Look, I think the challenge for the conservative movement, the challenge for every movement in American politics, is to apply your principles that as a conservative I believe are tested and proven by time and history, applying those principles to the 21st century. We applied them to the 20th century, but now we have to apply them to the 21st century. And so for me, I mean, like everybody, we came from somewhere, we bring with us that experience. As I said last night, I graduated college with about $150,000 in student loans between, law school and undergrad. There was no other way for me to pay for it. It was a combination of Pell Grants and Stafford loans and then student loans, which as I said last night, I paid off with the proceeds of my book, which is a perfect holiday gift. Available on Amazon now.
An
American Son, that's right. Anyway, but I never would have been able to go to school without that. It's just that simple. If there weren't Pell Grants and there wasn't student loan programs, I would not be a college graduate.
Now, Senator, in your speech last night, you talked a little bit about how fortunate we are to be where we are, who we are. You talked about how, but for an accident, if you were in your dad's shoes, you pointed out that you would probably be a very opinionated bartender.
Right. Because I think of any other, you think about my parents came to this country, they were relatively unskilled and uneducated. I think my dad went to the 4th grade or something like that. My mom, not much more. They grew up in very underprivileged circumstances. They moved to the United States, and in the 20th century, they were able to find jobs where they could own a house, buy a car, take vacations. You know, we never had everything we wanted, but we always had more than we needed. And that's a tribute to the miracle of the American middle class. And I understand that being raised by parents like that somewhere else would not have meant what it meant here. I would have not have gone as far. I would be stuck somewhere else.
You had more than you needed, but you were a kid. Did you realize it at the time or at the time?
Well, I'm a kid. You know, you don't realize these things. I mean, you just realize what thing I always realized, and I think I give my parents great credit for this, is they from the very beginning, just really drilled deep to us that there was nothing we couldn't do. That in essence, you know, there's no limits to how far you could go. We have some limits because we got here kind of late. We don't know the language as well as we need to. We don't have the skills. But you guys can be anything you want. Really, there's no reason why you can't. And I just can't tell you how important that is for a young person to not only have dreams, but to believe those dreams are possible. And if I worry about anything, is that too many young Americans, and I spoke about this last night, either aren't dreaming or believe those dreams aren't accessible to them because of the circumstances that they're growing up in. We've got to deal with that somehow, and government has a role to play in that.
Now, Politico's James Hohman, who covered your speech last night, pointed out that there was a word that was missing from your speech. That word was Romney. You didn't mention Mitt Romney, who until 3 weeks ago was the leader of the party. Is Mitt Romney going to disappear, or does he have a continuing role as a leader of the party?
I hope he's not going to disappear, and I hope he does have a continuing role, and he has a
what do you
lot
think
to
his role
contribute.
should be?
Well, first of all, very few people have done what he's done, which is run for president, be the nominee of the party, and experience what that means. But apart from
And
that,
get crushed.
well, that's not accurate. I mean, you know, he got 47%. That's a lot of votes. I mean, the truth is he won a lot of states. He didn't lose 49-1. I mean, he won places, and he has a lot of supporters. And so I think the point, but he's also been successful at life. I mean, if you look at, and I told them this too, I mean, Mitt Romney is a role model as a person. I mean, as a father, as a husband, as a community leader. I think he has a lot to offer the Republican Party in our country. And I don't know exactly what that role is going to be, but I'm excited to see what it's going to be because I think he has a lot to continue to contribute.
Now, one of the issues that you're going to be talking about in the coming year is immigration. And the big enchilada has been called of immigration reform as a pathway to citizenship. Yes or no? Can that get done in the next 4 years?
I hope so. In the next 2 years, I'm really hopeful that we can deal with the issue of immigration holistically. Look, I think it needs to be dealt with comprehensively, but not in a comprehensive bill, in a comprehensive package of bills. And the reason why that's important is because I think each of these issues have their own constituencies and deserve to be dealt with squarely for what they are. And I think there's consensus on almost all of them. I think we can reach consensus on border infrastructure and E-Verify, on modernizing our legal immigration system, particularly as it applies to entrepreneurs and STEM and, you know, high-tech professions. I think we can build a strong consensus about ag workers and guest worker programs. We need to have a functional one.
Those are all the easier
Well,
things.
they're not easier. I mean, there's intra-party debates on those. The kids, you know, and some sort of alternative to the DREAM Act that allows us to accommodate these kids without encouraging it in the future. And if you do all of those things, you're still left with the problem of the people who are here undocumented. But my point is, it's going to be a lot easier, not easy, but a lot easier, both politically and from a policy perspective, to deal with those folks that are here undocumented if you've dealt with these other issues. Number one, there'll be less of them because they'll be able to avail themselves of a guest worker program or the alternative to the DREAM Act or a reformed legal immigration system. Second, the American people will say, well, you did E-Verify, you did border security, so we know this problem isn't going to happen again. Now we can be what we've always been, the most compassionate people in the world, and view this situation for what it is. So I am optimistic. If we can depoliticize this issue, we can solve it. And I think there's as much opportunity to do that now as there's ever been, I hope. And I haven't been there that long, but just from what I've followed of it, I hope that that's the case, because we need to. We got to deal with it. Not for political purposes, for American purposes. If this country doesn't have a 21st century immigration system, it cannot be what it's destined to be, which is the single greatest nation in human history.
Now, in the few days after the election, when Republicans looked at the figures from how Mitt Romney had done with Hispanic voters, I think there was something like a 44-point gap. Right away, they got religion and said, oh, we need to do something aggressive on immigration. But it wasn't a couple weeks. Republicans, as you alluded to, already couldn't agree on what needs to be done. The fervor seemed to have already cooled. How do you get your own party on the same page, let alone trying to bring along Democrats?
Well, you know, I disagree. I don't think that that's really what's happening. I think what's happening is the concept of immigration reform, there's a lot of consensus on. The details of immigration reform, like every major piece of legislation, need to be examined. I'll give you an example. You know, we have millions of people waiting to come here legally. A lot of them come to my office, or their relatives do, and say, we've done it the right way, we've waited, we've paid the fees, we've done it the right way, but you're telling me that somehow if I came illegally, it would have been faster? I mean, it didn't seem right. So people are troubled by that. That's just one example of the kind of debate that I think we're going to have. On the ag worker, guest worker part of it, there's going to be a lot of debate in the Democratic Party. There are labor unions that are not in favor of a guest worker program. They're going to have an internal party debate about these things. So this is going to take a while. It's not going to be, there's no magic solution to this that would have been done a long time ago. But we have to do it. It's important to do it, and I believe we can do it.
Okay, last question on this. 4 years from now, we're sitting here. What is the likelihood that Congress has passed, the President has signed, some pathway to citizenship for current illegals?
You know, I think it's more than 50-50, and I hope that I hope I'm not being overly optimistic about it. But I certainly believe that portions of immigration reform can be dealt with quicker than others. And but my hope is, for the good of this country, that we'll have dealt with that issue and moved on.
All right. I brought along an old friend.
Oh, yeah.
This is from 2006 when you were Florida official, 100 innovative ideas for Florida's future. And a lot of these are things that you're still talking about, but one of the promises that you said that we should make to people is life without the, you said that you favored life without exception for sexual predators. One of the issues that you've talked about is human trafficking, sexual exploitation of children. Why has the United States been so slow to act on this issue?
Well, it's hard to believe we have a domestic problem for people. You know, for us, human trafficking and human slavery is something that's going on somewhere else. It's hard for people to accept that it's happening right here. And look, the sex trafficking is a horrific thing, and there's a lot of it in the United States. But there's also labor trafficking. Numerically, there's more people in that category. We shouldn't overlook the fact that there are people sleeping in closets who are being held here in this country as basically indentured servants. And we have to deal with that as well. And it's a big domestic problem.
What's the single biggest thing that you think should be done to alleviate child sex trafficking?
Well, first of all, it starts with awareness. I mean, people have to actually believe that this exists. And beyond, there's signs of it, and sometimes we ignore it. One of the things we're doing in South Florida, I think it's great, is they're training folks at the entry points and customs to spot this. You know, there are signs and profiles of human trafficking that are seen, so I think the awareness part of it is important. The second part of it is we have to have a place to take, especially these young women, when they interact with law enforcement, because a lot of them find themselves into prostitution, and then they get treated like perpetrators as opposed to victims. And the psychology of someone who has been forced into a life of prostitution initially is the psychology of a perpetrator, but in fact they are victims, and we have to get law enforcement and our judicial system to treat these young women as victims and put them in a setting where they can pull themselves away from drug addiction and whatever else the pimp is using to keep them trapped.
Okay. In just a minute, Politico's Lois Romano is going to ask a question, but first I'm going to ask you a couple Twitter questions that have come in while we've been talking here. One of them is, who's the best leader in Washington, D.C.?
Robert Griffin III.
Why did the majority of Americans reject the Republican Party in the recent election?
Well, I think it was an election. In elections, it was a very close election if you look at the numbers and the differences between the two. But look, what I think the Republican Party can do a better job of being the home of the limited government, free enterprise movement. And we need to improve on the way we connect those policies to the everyday lives of everyday people.
Why has there been this failure to connect?
I'm not sure there's one issue for it, but I'm not sure there's one reason for it, and I haven't had time to kind of think about why it is that it hasn't happened. But it needs to happen, because I truly believe that the principles we stand for are the only way. Free enterprise, limited government is the only way for us to stabilize and grow our middle class, which is what we hope every American can at least attain.
How worried are you about the consequences for the Republican Party of the demographic changes in the country?
Well, I don't know about you mean from the voters' perspective? I mean, the changes, you mean the demographic changes or the, you know, I'm not, I don't think any voter in America is, I mean, there are obviously voters that are locked into one party or the other, but then the fastest growing group of voters are voters that vote for candidates, not parties. And what they're looking for are people that understand the issues and the anxieties that they face and the hopes that they have, and then offer real and concrete policy solutions and a real role for government, an appropriate role for government to play in addressing those anxieties that they face. And so I think that we're one election away from being able to do that. We always are, but we have to do it. We have to recognize what it is and concentrate on doing it.
How much of a danger to Republicans do you think is posed by these changing demographics?
Well, I wouldn't call it a danger. I think it's a challenge.
Wouldn't?
No, it's a challenge. Like every election is a challenge, to take what you stand for and try to convince people that it is better for them than what the other side is offering. And that's sometimes people have forgotten the art of persuasion. I mean, politics is not just about being for what people are for already. Sometimes politics should be about, and oftentimes it should be about, understanding what is the right thing for the country and working hard to convince people that that's the right thing for our country. And that's an important part of the political process that seems to have gotten lost recently.
Why did the Romney-Ryan ticket lose Hispanic voters by 44 points?
Well, look, the Hispanic voter, number one, is not monolithic. Number two is there are a large number of Hispanics in this country who also happen to be liberal Democrats. And there's nothing Romney and Ryan could have done to change that. There is a significant number of Hispanic voters that vote for the candidate, not the party. And I think there are a lot of things that have happened before even this ticket came together that hurt our opportunity to do it. Unfortunately, I think the Republican Party, for many years, allowed itself to be positioned as the anti-illegal immigration party. And we certainly are against illegal immigration, as most Americans are. But what we really need to be is the pro-legal immigration party.
So how do you shake that image?
By being it. I mean, by basically putting out concrete proposals like I intend to do and others intend to do to show that we are proud of the fact that every year 1 million people immigrate to the United States legally and permanently. There's no other country in the world that comes close. There's not even a close second. Number two, we understand that legal immigration is not just an important part of our heritage, but an important part of our future. And number three, by understanding that when you talk about illegal immigration, you're not talking about a plague of locusts. You're talking about people, real human beings, who are here for the same reasons that people have always come here, because they cannot provide their family a better life where they live, and there's this country where they can, and so that's where they go. That's a reality. These are real human beings. And that's why it's such a big issue in the Hispanic community, because it's not just a statistical issue. You know somebody who's living under this circumstance, and your heart breaks for them, even if you know that what they've done is legally wrong. Morally, you feel for them, because you recognize that for the grace of God, that could be you.
Now, Jim Vandehei and I did a column this week, the debut of Behind the Curtain, and for that, your advisors said that you didn't want to be pigeonholed as the Hispanic candidate, that you wanted to be known as a conservative, solution-oriented leader. Ethnicity does matter, though. Ethnicity is a big part of the reason for the curiosity about you. Do you feel pressure in that area?
No, I don't. First of all, not that I don't want to be the Hispanic candidate per se. I come from where I come from, and it deeply influences who I am every single day of my life. I mean, I grew up in a family that's faced certain struggles and circumstances. I still live to this very day in a neighborhood of people whose lives are the kinds of things that I hope government policies will speak to, and I'm deeply influenced by that. So there's no way to escape that. I personally know people that have struggled with immigration issues, so I'm deeply influenced by that. I think that applies to a broad swath of Americans. I mean, the issues that the Hispanic community faces are not that different from the issues that everyday Americans face. As we speak, you know, families are getting ready to take their kids to school this morning, and what they're worried about is what my parents used to worry about, and that is, how are we going to make bills at the end of the month? How are we going to give these kids a chance to do better than we did? And I think the political movement, not the political party, the political movement that can best identify concrete things that government can do to address those are the ones that are going to be successful.
Now, given the way party operatives think, the way party officials speak, think the way the media thinks, how do you avoid being the Hispanic candidate?
I don't really worry about, I mean, I am who I am. My name is Marco Rubio. I don't intend to change that. I come from where I come from. I'm proud of where I come from. I think it influences my public policy in a positive way. It doesn't make me better than anybody else. It doesn't make me more qualified, perhaps, than anybody else. It just makes me who I am. And I intend to continue to share that, not for an ethnic purpose, but for a policy purpose. It informs me, and it allows me to relate and hopefully to, apply public policy. Why do I care about Pell Grants and student loans? Because I had them, because I wouldn't be able to go to college without them. I think that's good. I think that's a good thing in public policy. I think that's why we have a representative republic.
Okay, Lois Romano has a question.
Hi, Lois. Nice to see you.
Senator, you have said, I've heard you say that actually the Latino community is quite conservative, socially, social issues, fiscally, as is the African American community in a lot of ways. Yet, as Mike has said, both communities rejected your party. Beyond immigration reform, you know, what kind of policies should the party put forth? It's not just a message, it's not just rhetoric, that could attract this demographic back. Like, for instance, there was a lot of talk during the campaign about the children of immigrants, you know, being able to go to school. What else can they offer, and can you get that by the right flank of your party?
Well, first of all, I think the issues that appeal to minorities in this country are the same that appeal to everybody else. And there are two things that are, what's the number one, I think, issue that hovers over us? And that is this growing opportunity gap between the hopes and dreams that many of our people have and their chance to accomplish it, particularly to be able to get into that middle class that my parents were able to get into in a service industry job. What are the impediments to that? Two major things. Number one, we have an economy that isn't creating enough of those middle-class jobs. And number two, we have a lot of people who do not have the skills to do those new middle-class jobs. And there's a disproportionate number of minorities who fall in that category for a lot of reasons. It starts with access to education. And as I've talked about the impediments I faced in my own life to education and how impossible it would have been for me or any of my siblings, for that matter, to go to college if there weren't Pell Grants and student loans. Secondly is the social realities, the social changes that have occurred in our country. You can't separate economic well-being of people from their social well-being. One of the leading causes of lack of preparedness is the fact that there are many young kids in America that are growing up in very difficult circumstances, raised by heroic single parents, sometimes a grandmother, in a dangerous neighborhood, in substandard housing, with poor nutrition, no access to primary health care, and schools that are failing. Those kids are going to struggle. They don't go to after-school activities because their parents can't afford the fees, and they can't get out of work in time to take them. Now, can you succeed? Yeah, there's some heroic single parents out there doing some amazing things, and they'll be the first ones to tell you it is hard, and yet we can't be the country we need to be if we don't address that. And government can have a role in that, but ultimately civil society has a bigger role, and we should support that. We have to address that. We have to recognize it and talk about it. And maybe we haven't done enough of that in the limited government free enterprise movement. So again, I don't think that that's a way to appeal to minority voters. I think that's a way to improve our country, because we can't move ahead without them. We can't.
All right, Senator Rubio, we're going to cliff dive here for a second. But first, I think you have a special guest here. We'd love for you to introduce.
Yeah, my wife is here. I don't know where she's sitting. Where is she? Oh, there she is. Today's her birthday.
Welcome. Happy birthday. Playbook's big on birthdays. So, how are you going to celebrate?
Isn't this romantic?
Yeah.
You know?
How are you going to celebrate?
We're going to go to dinner and try to go see the Lincoln movie. It's hard to see movies with 4 little kids, you know? They'll sit through the first 15 minutes of Lincoln, and then they want to know if he was really a vampire. And I say, that's a different movie.
Senator, the fiscal cliff. Yesterday, ABC's Jonathan Karl wrote about the Republican doomsday scenario. And the doomsday scenario was that you vote for the Senate bill extending the Bush tax cuts for 98% of people and say to the president, that's it, no more, come back to us on the debt ceiling. Jonathan Wiseman in the New York Times today wrote about that today as a fallback position. Could you support that?
Well, first of all, I don't want to feed into this whole doomsday apocalyptic stuff, because I obviously am confident that there are enough people, the majority of people in this town, that understand that what we're playing with here, what they're playing chicken with, is the most important country in the world. And you know, we are on the verge of doing some significant and perhaps lasting damage to this enormous and extraordinary country that we inherited. And I don't think anyone wants that to be a part of their public service legacy. That being said, before we talk about fiscal cliff, let's remember we are here because of the last fiscal cliff. In essence, we had another fiscal cliff type scenario with the debt limit that created the scenario that led to this. And it's this ridiculous idea that I voted against, that let's put a bunch of bad things to happen at one time because that will force Washington to do something. Well, surprise, it didn't work. Here we are again facing this. So we have 2 issues that we have to face. Number one is, in the immediate term, is avoid doing damage. In essence, avoid doing harm. And so we need to look for a way to accomplish that in the short term. And then we have to have a conversation about getting the fiscal house in order. I heard Bob talk about that a few moments before I came out here. It's just fundamentally true. We spend $1 trillion a year more than we take in. That's just a fact. We have to address it. And I approach this issue with the following belief, that the only way we can get that in order is through rapid economic growth. There is no taxes you can raise to bring this debt down. What the president is proposing does not raise enough revenue to make a significant dent on the debt, but it will make a dent on job creation, particularly middle-class job creation. And so that's why I oppose this plan. Instead, I think that we should do real tax reform. If there are loopholes in there, you know, there's a loophole for being able to write off your yacht as a second home, you know, the interest. Let's go after things like that, but not as a revenue-generating mechanism, although I do believe we need more revenue. And the way you generate more revenue is through rapid economic growth. It's the only way to generate the kind of revenue we need, and then you have to hold the line on future spending.
What are the circumstances under which you would vote for a tax increase on the top 2%?
Well, I just don't think that's a solution. For me, it's not about a pledge or millionaires and billionaires. I just think the number one issue is to grow the economy. It's not about taxes higher or lower. It's about growing the economy and creating jobs. And I believe that that proposal will hurt job creation. Here's why. The true millionaires and billionaires, they have the best accountants and lawyers in America. Do whatever you want with the tax code. These guys are going to maximize it. The people who get crushed is the small S corporation owner who cannot afford to do all this jujitsu, in the tax code and ends up getting creamed. And so when their taxes go up, they've got to get the money from somewhere. So here's the three things they can do. They can either raise their prices, which is bad for consumers. They can cut back on infrastructure investment, which is bad for manufacturing. Or they can lay off workers, cut their hours, or not hire them. None of those three things are good for our economy. It's not about a pledge or millionaires and billionaires. It's about growth. This stuff hurts growth. So if the president has a tax increase that will help grow the economy, I'm interested to hear about it.
So you would vote against the fallback plan extending the tax cuts for 98% of people?
I will vote against any plan that hurts growth because I think growth is our only solution. How's that? I mean, that's the bottom line. It is an answer. I'm not voting for anything that hurts growth. And I think raising taxes, particularly the way the president proposes, hurts growth.
All right, last question on this. You think we're more likely to have a deal by Christmas Eve, by New Year's Eve, the deadline, or you think we go over the cliff?
I think something will happen. I do. I believe that we'll avoid this. There's just too much at stake. I mean, I think something will happen.
By Christmas Eve
yes.
or by New Year's Eve?
Maybe I'm being optimistic, but yes.
And what convinces you?
I just know these, at least in the Senate, I know these guys. I mean, when the cameras are off and people are being people and not just senators on television, people get it. I mean, this is important. And so hopefully we'll get there in the short term and in the long term as well.
So you think a deal by Christmas?
I hope so, yeah. I'm optimistic.
All right, you caused a little ruckus in the blogosphere a few weeks ago with your answer to a question from GQ. So, so how old do you think the Earth is?
Well, look, first of all, let me tell you about the answer I gave. The answer I gave was actually trying to make the same point the president made a few years ago, and that is there is no scientific debate on the age of the Earth. I mean, it's established it pretty definitively. It's 4.5 billion, at least 4.5 billion years old. I was referring to a theological debate, which is a pretty healthy debate, and the theological debate is this, and I'm not a theologian either, but the theological debate...
Just to set the table, you began your answer by saying, I'm not a scientist, man.
Right, because I'm not in a position to the extent there is any kind of debate about the age of the Earth scientifically, I'm not in a position really to mediate that. But on the theological debate is how do you reconcile what science has definitively established with what you may think your faith teaches? Now, for me, actually, when it comes to the age of the Earth, there is no conflict. I believe that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And I think that scientific advances have given us insight into when He did it and how He did it. But I still believe God did it. And that's how I've been able to reconcile that, and I think that's consistent with the teachings of my church. But other people have a deeper conflict. And I just think in America, we should have the freedom to teach our children whatever it is we believe. And that means teaching them science. They have to know the science. But also parents have the right to teach them the theology and to reconcile those two things as they believe and see fit. And I think that's the point the president was making back in 2007 when he was asked a similar question. So, that's what I was saying.
Okay. So accepting that context, how old is the Earth?
Well, the science says it's about 4.5 billion years old. So, obviously that, and our faith, and my faith teaches that that's not inconsistent with, in essence, God created the universe. He created, in the beginning, out of nothing, God created the heavens and the earth. And science has given us insight into when He did it and how He did it. And it's the more science learns, the more I'm convinced that God is real.
You've had a very fascinating faith journey as a child. You were baptized Catholic. When your family moved to Nevada, you were baptized Mormon. You later returned to the Catholic Church, helped lead your family back.
So maybe I am a theologian.
And now I think you both go to Mass and attend services at a Protestant Christ Fellowship.
Well, I'm a Roman Catholic. I mean, I 100% accept the Church's teaching and the Church's teaching authority, and I participate fully in all the Church's sacraments, as does my family. In addition to that, we interact with and have gotten to know a church in South Florida, which is a phenomenal teacher of the written word, and particularly their pastor. And
Who's the pastor?
Rick Blackwood. He's a great pastor and a great teacher of the written word. And to be quite frank with you, it's not much different than Roman Catholics who like watching Billy Graham sermons, except that I get to go in person and I know these people and I have grown in my faith and what I've learned. Although I'm a Roman Catholic and support 100% the teaching authority of the Church, I have deep appreciation for how our brothers and sisters in Christ are bringing hundreds of thousands of people to salvation in other faith traditions. And, there's a lot of people I know that actually do that. That's just kind of a big deal to hear, I guess. But in the real world, a lot of people say, yeah, I've done that too. I just think it's enriched us.
But there are some Sundays when you go to both.
Yeah, sure.
That's a lot of church.
You can never have enough God.
I think we could agree on that. All right, as you go forth and you may be a national candidate, as you certainly continue in the public forum, you're going to be asked a lot of tough questions. And here's one of them. When does life begin?
At conception. And I think science has established that definitively as well. When a human egg becomes a human embryo, that is a human life. It can't become anything but a human being. And that's and I wish there were more folks in this town who are deeply committed to science, and the belief in science would not ignore that scientific fact. I mean, they're pretty brave about saying the age of the earth, but they don't want to say when life begins. They somehow pretend it's some sort of great mystery. Science has definitively established life begins at conception.
Now, why did your comments about the age of the earth cause such a ruckus? The Krugman crowd, they all went crazy.
Well, first of all, I think it caused a ruckus, in that group or in that people. I mean, not a single person at the supermarket asked me about it the day before Thanksgiving. So, I mean, let's be clear in perspective here. But look, I'm fine. Look, I love.
You mean there's a world beyond the blogosphere?
Yeah, there is, and beyond Washington, by the way. And so let me just say this to you. I'm fine. I mean, I like this kind of stuff. I think it's good. If I say something that triggers conversation and allows me the opportunity to talk further about things I believe in, I'm happy with that.
So do you regret your answer to GQ?
I don't regret it. I mean, I wish I would have, given a better answer, a more succinct answer. But, we went from talking about hip hop, and then the guy pivoted to the earth. I mean, I'm not a robot. It got me off guard a little bit, I guess. But the point is, that's the point I was trying to make, and I thought I made it.
And you were a little irritated about the question.
I wasn't actually. I thought I was making a point, and obviously, if I'd had 30 minutes to sit down and type it out, it would have been more succinct and a little more clear. But that's fine. I mean, it's not the worst thing that's ever happened to me.
Another hard question you may be asked, is homosexuality a sin?
Well, I can tell you what faith teaches, and the faith teaches that it is. And that's what the Bible teaches, and that's what faith teaches. But it also teaches that there are a bunch of other sins that are no less. For example, it teaches that lying is a sin. It teaches that disrespecting your parents is a sin. It teaches that stealing is a sin. It teaches that coveting your neighbor and what your neighbor has is a sin. So there isn't a person in this room that isn't guilty of sin. I don't go around pointing fingers in that regard. I'm responsible for my salvation, and I'm responsible for my families, and for inculcating in my family what our faith teaches, and then they'll become adults and decide how they want to apply that in life. As a policymaker, I could just tell you that I'm informed by my faith, and my faith informs me in who I am as a person, but not as a way to pass judgment on people.
You're reading Jake Tapper's book,
Yeah.
The Outpost. It's on the New York Times bestseller list. What are you learning from it?
Well, first of all, I think it's confirming a lot about the challenges that there are in that conflict in Afghanistan. It's a difficult conflict that has multiple spheres to it. Obviously, there's the direct conflict with making sure there's not a safe zone for the Taliban. But then internally, Afghanistan, you have these internal, for lack of a better term, tribal rivalries that have to be played out, where sometimes the U.S.'s cooperation in one city with one group of people creates resentment among another. In essence, they want to redevelop their neighborhoods, but they don't want to be seen as lackeys of the Americans, so it gives you this very strange dynamic. It also gives you insight into the impact that history is having in that area, because this is a part of the world that's been used to conquerors for thousands of years coming and going. And so they've been able to create a relationship and how they establish that and be able to hedge their bets. So apart from the human tragedies that are in there, your heart breaks when you read about someone who just had a baby a few days earlier, spoke to his wife right before he went on this mission, and then died in a helicopter crash. And so your heart breaks on the human realm, and it reminds you of the human cost of this effort. It also reminds you of the logistical challenges of the effort.
So did this book make you regret our approach in Afghanistan?
No, I think I just think it reminds us of the challenges of it. I mean, at the end of the day, look, Afghanistan is important, and it's important for multiple reasons. Number one, because we don't want to create a safe haven in Afghanistan for people to be able to come back and reconstitute the Taliban and a safe haven for al-Qaeda. But it's also about Pakistan. I mean, to have an unstable Afghanistan where radical Islamist, well-armed elements are organized is a danger to Pakistan and its nuclear capabilities. And they're concerned about that as well. You know, the raid to get bin Laden could have never happened without a presence in Afghanistan. So I think the future of Afghanistan matters in terms of regional stability. And I think that's why I'm so cautious about the way we disengage. Because if we disengage in a counterproductive way, it's going to lead to greater chaos and perhaps even a setback. And all the lives that have been lost, all the blood that has been shed, and all the treasure that's been spent will have been for naught.
What do you make of President Obama?
Well, I don't know President Obama well as a person. I obviously, from what I know...
Has he ever called you?
Yeah, I've spoken to him a few times. And he was gracious enough to call me when my daughter was injured a few weeks ago and left a very gracious voicemail for which I'm eternally grateful, as did the Vice President.
So this is Amanda, your 12-year-old daughter. How is she
She's
doing?
doing great, thank you, but she's doing fantastic and no lasting effects. But let me just say that you know, I have deep admiration for the way he's been able to balance probably the hardest job in the world with his most important jobs of father and husband. And I think he, as a man, is a role model in those roles. I have deep policy disagreements with the president, and obviously that's why I'm grateful we have a republic where we could debate it.
What have you learned from the way he's handled his role as a father?
As a father, well, I think he's done a great job of, as I think the Clintons did, in raising the two young girls, in the Clintons' case, one young girl, under a very intense bubble of scrutiny for himself personally, but also the way he divides up his time. From what I've read, he's never missed a parent-teacher conference. So if the President of the United States has never missed a parent-teacher conference, none of us should either.
Now, you've drawn parallels between him and Fidel Castro. What's the connection?
No, that's not accurate. I've never said that. What I've said, there is no parallel between Fidel Castro and Barack Obama or any American politician for that matter. Fidel Castro's never been elected to anything. He's never run for office. He's never put his name in front of anyone. That's not any time what I've ever said. I'm not sure where you got that from. I can tell you that I've drawn parallels between places where government dominates the economy and the direction that the president and some in his party want to take us. But Cuba goes well beyond that. I mean, Cuba's not just about government dominating the economy. Cuba's about going to jail for accessing the internet. Cuba's about getting beat up on the side of a church because you dare to speak out against the government. And you know, that doesn't happen here. And so I'm not in any way drawing that parallel.
Do you feel less free than you did 4 years ago?
Well, I don't know if that's the right way to put it. I think that our future economic options are being significantly diminished by some of the choices that have been made by the president and by his party. And I'll give you a real-world example, and I talked about this last night. I, as a federal employee, am blessed to have a chance at a federal savings account for health care, federal savings account for health care, an FSA. And I wish more Americans had those. And you know what I use that for? I use it to pay my co-payment when I take my kids to the hospital, like when they have an accident on a golf cart, or to pay for orthodontic care. But now they've changed it. Under Obamacare, instead of being able to save $5,000 a year for that, I can only save $2,500 a year for that. And now, if I want to buy Advil because they've tightened my daughter's braces and she's in pain, I got to get a doctor's prescription to buy an over-the-counter medicine and pay for it with my FSA. That's ridiculous. I thought that's a dumb thing, and yet that's the law of the land. So in that front, yeah, I think it's been counterproductive on things but I hope we can change that.
So you do think we're less free?
I think we're going to be less prosperous as long as government continues in the direction that it's going now. And I think the biggest problem that we face is that there is no long-term solution to our long-term debt problem, and it is scaring people from investing in America because they are afraid that the longer this goes, the higher the likelihood of massive tax increases to pay for it. And 20 years ago, we may have had more flexibility in that regard. Now there are a lot of countries that are open and friendly to business. And increasingly, unfortunately, firms are finding that they'd rather be here, but if it gets too uncomfortable, they'll just invest somewhere else where they'd rather be here. But we need to make sure they stay here or come back.
Now, Senator, for our column Behind the Curtain that Jim Vandehei and I did, we were told that we're going to spend the next couple of years working on legislative accomplishments, both on your middle class agenda, which we talked about, immigration, perhaps something on.
By the way, that's the job of a senator, is legislative accomplishment. So I don't know why that's newsworthy, but.
And then after the midterm elections of 2014, sometime after that, you would make a decision about whether to run for president. What would it take for you to run for president in 2016?
Well, to be honest with you about that, I enjoy public service, and I want to. And I know this is the answer everybody gives, but I don't know how long I can be in public service, but I enjoy public service. And I think what I, as a person, everyone needs to decide as I approach 2016 is, do I want to continue to do that in the Senate? Is there some other opportunity out there for me? Or do I want to return to the private sector and give someone else a shot? And there are a lot of factors that go into that decision. Part of it is whether you feel a calling to it, whether you feel the fire to do it, not just because people tell you should do something. Part of it is whether your family life can sustain it. 4 years from now, all of my kids will be 4 years older. Some will be entering their teenage years that, from what I understand, are pretty challenging times. And so, all these things are real factors that go into account. And then part of it is, do you have something to say? Or, because I think you only do things like that if you have something to say.
You seem to have something to say.
Well, here's what the point is, though. Am I better off saying it in the Senate or in some other capacity? So what I would say to you is that I have a job now. And the best thing I can do is to do the best I can at the job that I have now. Because what I have learned from watching others and from myself is that if you do a good job at your job, you always have other options, opportunities present themselves, and sometimes they're unexpected. You know, I never thought I'd be a U.S. Senator. I never had any ambition for federal office. But that opportunity presented itself, partially as a result of some of the things we were able to accomplish when I was the Speaker of the Florida House. And so I think that same principle applies. So who knows, I may be the Commissioner of the NFL. I keep putting that out there in the hopes that, you know, someone will say, hey, maybe we should interview this guy.
You're going to have to fight Dr. Rice for it.
Well, yeah, look, it's a competitive process.
So are you likely to run for president in 2016?
I have no idea. I just don't know. And so I think right now what I should focus on is being a real good U.S. Senator, moving forward on public policy. And in a few years, you know, I'll have an opportunity to decide whether I want to run for re-election in the U.S. Senate, run for something else, or go home and give someone else a shot at this.
Okay, we're about to get the hook here. So penultimate question, why did Mitt Romney lose Florida?
Well, I think Florida is a very competitive state. Do not underestimate the, as just a political observer, the genius of the Obama turnout machine. Anecdotally, I can tell you there's this restaurant near the church that we go to, the Catholic church, that right next door to it is a storefront. And the Obama Organizing for America folks were in there about 12, 14 months before the election. I remember saying, what are they doing? You know, it's 15 months ahead. What could they possibly be doing? Well, now we know. And so, you know,
They were registering voters, right?
Yeah, they were registering voters. They were identifying voters and turning them out in ways that have never been done before. And I have admiration for what they did, and I can't wait to copy it, you know. That's what we should view it as, and to improve it and bring it forward. On the other hand, you know, and then I think from a factor set, look, Florida is a state that people are very anxious about the future, and particularly about their opportunity to either stay in the middle class or get to the middle class. And for whatever reason, at the end of the day, we just did, as a movement, did not do a good enough job of convincing people that our ideas were the right ideas for those ambitions, and that's where we need to get better at.
What can Republicans learn from the Obama campaign?
Well, I mean, look, whoever has the high ground on technology is going to win, in both warfare and in politics. That's just a fact, and so we can never allow that to happen again. And so I think that's important. I think there's this one lesson is that you want to make sure that from a technological perspective, you are state of the art in communicating your message to people and identifying people that support you and ensuring that not only are they supporters, but that they're voters. A supporter that's not a voter is not much use on election day.
How do you regain the technological high ground?
I think investing in it. And it's there. I mean, it can be done. And by the way, the technology of 2012 was amazing. The technology of 2016 is indescribable. And it can be done, but it's got to be invested in. It's got to be a priority. And part of it is no one's fault. I mean, you know, Chairman Priebus inherited a party that had some financial problems and spent the better part of 2 years just getting the party out of a financial hole, which didn't create a lot of time or space to invest in infrastructure and technology. So it's part of what we need to do. You still need to have you need to have a marketing department, but you also need to have a good production department. So in essence, you have to have good policy that you're selling, and then you have to have state-of-the-art methods to communicate that to people.
Do you personally tweet?
Yeah, I try to, yeah. But no one has ever sent a tweet on my behalf. I control my own Twitter feed because it's authentic and it's real and it's largely about sports and hip-hop, so mostly sports.
You're a Dolphins guy?
They got beat, yeah, last Sunday.
What devices do you carry?
Devices?
Yeah.
What do you mean?
Like iPhone,
Oh,
iPad,
okay,
BlackBerry.
yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I use an iPhone
not
and
a
an
pacemaker,
iPad.
right?
Yeah, no, right. I didn't know you meant a taser or something. I have
come in handy with that GQ guy.
That's right. I have an
Amaze me,
iPhone.
bro.
I use an iPhone and an old. I gotta upgrade the iPad. I'm still holding on to iPad 1, which has no video in it. But the iPhone, I use an iPhone. I think it's I lose track, man. I think it's the 4, or I don't know, an iPhone.
And last question, Senator Rubio, you wear a lot of hats. One of your hats is football coach for your son, Anthony. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I'm the defensive back coach. We lost in the first round of the playoffs. It wasn't my fault. We didn't give up a pass. Neither was there one attempted, by the way, so to be fair. But it was a tremendous amount of fun. I had a great time. My 7-year-old's first year playing tackle football, and you know, I had as much fun doing that as I ever have with anything else. It was great.
We have a lot of youth coaches in here, youth coaches watching. What's your tip for them? How do you connect with 7-year-olds?
You know, it's got to make it fun for them, but I think the most important thing you can do at 7 years of age for a kid is teach them the fundamentals of the sport. In football, it's not just about being a better player, it's about being safe. And if you can teach a kid early on to catch a ball, hold the ball right, and tackle with proper form, you're going to keep them safe and having fun. If you don't do that, you know, once they pick up habits, it's very difficult to break later. So with all the focus on head injuries, I spent a lot of time teaching my son and the kids how to tackle appropriately and the right way to tackle.
And you said make it fun for them. How do you do that?
Well, I mean, winning is fun, so you certainly want them to strive for winning. But the great thing about competitive sports, and particularly football, is it forces you to work with other people to accomplish a goal. Particularly on the offensive side of the ball, there's very little you can do by yourself. You can be the best running back in the world, but if your blocks in front of you aren't executed, you can't get anywhere. Same thing with a receiver. You can be wide open. If the guy didn't get you the ball, you're not going to score. So I think that applies to life, and the ability to work with others collaboratively in a competitive environment is a huge life skill that competitive sports, and in particular the extraordinary game of American football, teaches unlike anything else.
As we say goodbye, what do you want for Christmas?
At least a 8-8 record by the Dolphins, just so. But, you know, maybe we're better off losing a few games and getting a higher draft pick. I don't know. We'll see. I know I should aim higher.
Mrs. Rubio, happy birthday. We're honored to have you here. We really appreciate your being here. Thank you out in live stream land, people who've been watching us. We're thankful to the Bank of America for this partnership, for these events. Thank you for coming out so early. Appreciate it. Thank you for the great Twitter questions. Senator Rubio, thank you for a fantastic conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much. That was awesome. Thank you for having me.